Welcome to the question go through. This question is called ACCA Company, and it's all about the environmental, social and governance aspects of the syllabus, which means the ESG, but primarily this question is all about the environmental management accounting stuff. Now, there are 10 and 10 marks regarding part A and part B. So firstly, so we're going to respond to the board about the effect of ethical issues on the manufacturing decision, and then how the EMA will help. Okay, so environmental management accounting will help. So of course, we like to write approximately 20 sentences and to make sure that we convey the idea and to make sure that we closely link with the case information in. Now, I would say that this question is quite has no really correct answers for that. So make sure that you answer all the detailed requirements in the case there. So let's see the company information. So is it ACCA Company? Is a large company listed onto a stock exchange. So which means we need to care about the reporting aspects, okay, of this company in terms of its annual report, and also the disclosure of all other areas, including the ESG areas, because it will certainly affect their rating, something like that. The main objective is to maximize the long-term wealth of shareholders. Okay, so nearly each question would be the same here, so which means we need to see the total shareholder return, that kind of stuff. At the same time, that for the board of directors, when they're making decisions on behalf of the company, they will need to always balance risks and rewards. The largest shareholder is a pension fund that only invests in companies that behave ethically towards their stakeholders and the environment. Right, so which means that the pension fund will be a very key stakeholder and really looking for the ethical companies. So this is why, from an ethical point of view in the part 1, that focusing on the environmental part absolutely important there, because otherwise we'll lose quite lots of investments in there, i.e. our share price will fall if their job are shares, for example. All companies listed in J-land, right, so this is our country, must produce an annual corporate sustainability report. It's called CSR. And the company manufactures a diverse range of chemicals, ranging from those for use in industrial processes to household detergent and cleaning products. And our company is a well-known and trusted brand in J-land. Right, so you can highlight these keywords here. So firstly, we've got a pension fund as our large shareholders, and at the same time must produce a report. And thirdly, we cover a range of customers. And fourthly, a branding issue will be very important there. So, which means that by focusing on the environmental part, it would be beneficial, okay, to maintain the largest shareholder and for compliance reason, protecting health of a range of customers and even the community, and also helping with the brand. Many of the household products command premium prices. Right, okay, so we are able to charge a premium price, for example, if we behave ethically, because they use ingredients and manufacturing processes which cause less harm to the environment than those of the competitors. Right, so we can always be more outstanding among our competitors. Okay, so these are the ethical issues that we can consider, which means from an ethical point of view, yes, it will be more beneficial that we focus on the environmental part in the part 1. Let's read through the exhibit 2 though. It's all about K-land. Right, K-land is not the same as J-land, which would be in another country. Now, K-land, manufacturing plant. So we're told, as part of a wider strategy, the company plans to produce a new product, chemical K, right, okay, that would be a new product, which will require the building of a new manufacturing plant. Okay, so I would say that increases the capital employed. Not sure that how much profit that the plant and the product will bring to the company. the company is always manufactured in Jayland, but to increase business performance, okay, so the aim is to increase business performance. In other words, to increase profit, the board is considering whether to build the new plant overseas at the site identified in Kayland. Okay, so to see that the site, if I were to operate our business over there, which is whether or not we are complying with the relevant laws and regulations, they will affecting our reputation, brand, and affecting our premium prices that we currently charge, and for compliance, and whether or not we can retain the largest shareholder, which means the pension fund. Next one, due to high unemployment in Kayland and the labour costs are low there. Okay, high unemployment, labour costs are quite low there. So I would say that from the social point of view, which means the environmental, social governance, from the social point of view, it may be more ethical in pushing up the price that we pay to those labour. Environmental regulations are also much less strict than in Jayland. Right, so compliance reasons, and that would be an issue. Kayland is a hot and dry country where there's often insufficient water available to meet the needs of the population and their livestock. A company large shareholders, the pension fund, is aware that the company lacks experience in operating outside the Jayland. Okay, so increasing the risk that we may break the law. The shareholder is concerned that the board may pay insufficient attention to the impact of ethical issues on both strategy formulation and the business performance. Number 2, when deciding whether to manufacture in Kayland, the board asks for your advice on how the ethical issues might affect the decision to manufacture in Kayland as well. Okay, so what we are trying to do, if you see the answer, okay, onto your next page, I've divided this answer into 2 subheadings in the part A for the strategy formulation and business performance. So make sure they're ready, because the examining team is asking you about the ethical issue affecting the first and second part, okay, in the sub requirement there. Now, how can we say that in the actual exam there? I mean, in relation to strategy, which means the overall directions the business should go to, is that, I would say, is that the ethics would certainly affect the business strategy, because if you're demonstrating that you've got ethical behaviours, I would say that that would be a lasting competitive advantage or edge for that business, although it's not legally binding. Okay, so that will be a long-lasting thing. And of course, you can combine this with the cases that we can continue to charge the premium price per the case information, for example. The second point I'd like to write there is that the stakeholders, especially the largest shareholder, would certainly prefer the companies which is ethical. So, for example, in this case, is the pension fund or the predominant shareholder, which will be a pension fund, will be happy about our company and therefore continues to provide fund to our business to further expand our business in the longer term and stabilize our share price to a certain extent, because they are not going to be dumping our shares in the market if they are not happy, because now they're happy, they like to keep those shares instead. The next point I like to write there is that the specific shareholder would certainly influence our company and to mirror their own ethical principle. The investor may simply dump our shares, okay, so affecting our financial performance. And the fourth point in relation to strategy, which means I'm thinking about the long-term direction and where does the money come from, is that it will certainly affect the long-term shareholders' wealth, okay, when we are formulating our strategy. So if I were to behave in an ethical manner, the share price continues to increase, for example, because a lot of investors are buying our shares, they are happy with our company shares, for example, and increasing the share price and the long-term shareholders' wealth would be accumulated instead. Okay, so when we are formulating strategy, we focus on increasing our share price, which means we should focus on attracting these groups of shareholders to buy our shares. So the ways that we can do it is to be outstanding among our competitors, for example, being ethical. And all of our actions later on would be ethical instead. Okay, so this would be our strategy formulation. In terms of business performance or profits point of view there, how the ethical issues may affect them. So for example, if I were to dilute the pollutants, okay, so for example into a river, but may be permissible in that particular country, however, it may have long-term health threat to the local community, okay. And of course, it will certainly adversely affect the livestock in that particular country. It's called Cayland. And I would say that companies reluctant to assess the cleanup costs. Later on, you will see that in the Exhibit 3 there. So, because I would say that in the Exhibit 2, Cayland laws and regulations are more laxer and not very strict in there. So it will certainly affect our reputation if we are caught out of not complying with the relevant laws and regulations in there. And it will certainly affect our brand. Okay, brand would be affected. So at the same time, yes, the board has a responsibility towards the internal stakeholders, such as the employees. But over-investing in an overly cautious disposal method will certainly undermine the shareholder return and employee job security. Because you're overspending that money, so this means that there will be less money paid to the staff. So you can also say that in Cayland, given that the current labour costs are quite low, so this means that this may be lowering the labour costs at some point in the future, or will certainly worsen the situation there. At the same time, I can certainly say that affecting the brand, leading to, explaining the implications for that. So, for example, the boycott of a company and not many customers buying our products instead. And finally, that we enjoy brand loyalty because we set up a premium price. However, if the company is not going to be behaving ethically, this situation will certainly completely reversed, okay, instead. So very, very important that the CSR report, which showcase the implications of being ethically complying with the relevant regulation in there. Okay, so this is how we get these marks. From my perspective, you can produce different answers. Okay, you can see the marking scheme will be quite open. So make sure that you answer this requirement fully. Now, part B, how the EMA will help. So we are given the Exhibit 5 in terms of calculations. We'll show that later on. Let's read through the Exhibit 3 there. We're told the environmental impact of the chemical K. Now, the manufacture of the chemical K will consume large volumes of water taken from a nearby river. All right then. So to comply with the limited environmental regulations in the country, overseas, Cayland, some of the water will be used to dilute a toxic waste product, the waste product A, arising from the manufacturing process. Okay. We dilute a toxic waste product, which means the WPA, it seems to be this fine there. The diluted WPA would then be discharged back in a nearby river because they are now non-toxical any longer. The discharge into a river is not permitted in our home country, in Cayland. There is some scientific evidence that contact with WPA may cause serious long-term health problems to people which may not become apparent for many years. Alright then, however, the production of chemical K will cease after 10 years and the plant must be decommissioned. So we need to care about the costs associated with that. The site will remain contaminated with harmful chemicals for many years after decommissioning unless a separate cleaning operation is undertaken. So it seems to me that in Jayland, which means in our home country, this is not allowed, but in an overseas country, which means in Kayland, it's okay there, so that creates a big problem in that. So this means that in terms of cleaning costs, in terms of decommissioning costs, we need to take them into account. Moving on. So it's been suggested the company uses the environmental management accounting to improve the business performance. The EMA is the identification, collection and analysis of information related to physical and financial aspects of the organization's activities on the environment. The board wants your advice. Okay, now this is the detailed requirements, so you need to answer them in full on how the EMA will help the company in the following 4 areas. Right, the 10 marks will be split into these 4 areas, so make sure that you'll always be ready for that. Firstly, you need to calculate some costs in there, approximately 2 to 3 marks here. Secondly, in terms of how the EMA affecting the investment appraisal and setting up the performance measures, for example, its KPIs, and in relation to product pricing. The board calculates the net present value, which means after doing the project, the shareholders' wealth will be maximised by how much? $240 million compared to $200 million if this is done in Jayland. Now, if you can see in my answer, I've split into Jayland and Kayland for the MPV being 240 overseas and $200 million in our home country. Now, what's next? It has since been identified that these costs of decommissioning the plant and cleaning the site were not included in the calculations. So the board has now begun the work of estimating the present values of the costs to decommission and cleaning the 2 possible sites. Okay, what does that mean? So we are given the MPU of 200 and 240. However, it has not included the decommissioning and cleaning costs at all. So we need to subtract all of these and giving us the net present value after deducting these costs. And this is what we're trying to do. So we need to work out that 120 there. However, so what are these costs coming from? I would say that in the Exhibit 5, which means the Appendix 1, you're given that in Jayland and Kayland, for the decommissioning the plant, cleaning the site, you simply copy this information in, worth of 20 and 60 and 30 in, 20 and 60 and 30 in. However, we are not told about the cleaning costs in Kayland. Right there. So what I would do is that I would like to make an estimate for that. I would say that my assumption would be estimated that the cleaning costs in Kayland would be 50% more than that in Jayland. So can you change that figure? So for example, deeming that to be the same, 60, I would say that yes, you can do it. How about 70%? I would say that yes, you can do it. However, you need to justify why this would be a case there. I would say that, firstly, that for the cleaning costs, okay, for the cleaning costs, currently in our country, that the WPA, some of the water will be used to dilute the WPA and sort things, and the diluted WPA discharged back to the nearby river. Right, so if I were to charge this back, into the nearby river, in our home country, absolutely not allowed. However, in overseas country, this is allowed. So this means that I'll continue to dump, okay, the product into a river. So this means that at some point in the future, it may be, after the pressure groups, for example, at some point in the future, has put pressure to the government, and the government may step in, and therefore we will need to pay those cleaning costs instead. So if that's the case, if our estimates that currently I will continue to discharge a lot of these car pots into a river, so at some point in the future, I will need to incur higher costs in cleaning those up. And that's the main logic behind it. I would say that, yes, more than 50%, okay, higher than in Jayland, absolutely fine there. So if you deduct that 80 from the 200, giving us the present value after, deducting these costs will be 120 in each of the circumstances here. Now, the final step. I would say that, as you can see, that these costs, for example, in our Jayland, that would be $80, divided into 200, accounting for 40% of our estimated net present value. So these costs are huge from my perspective. However, 120 divided into 240, accounting for more than 50% on that. Right. It seems to me that higher costs to operate in Cayland, and given that in two countries, that the net present values that we can earn would be exactly the same based on our estimate. And the Cayland, it seems to me that firstly, no experience in operating overseas, and secondly, currently, the laws are not very strict, and it may be recommended to a board that operating in Jayland would be a better option. But it's entirely up to you though. Okay, so you have to justify your answer. Now, in relation to calculating the cost there, the comments I would like to make, I like to split the answer into calculating costs, investment appraisal, setting up KPI, and product pricing. So this means that 4 aspects there. Now I would say that because we need to prepare for the annual CSR report, okay, so making sure that accurately calculating these costs related to environmental will be very key there to be disclosed. However, the traditional information system would miss certain areas in relation to environmental part. So most likely, they're hidden or being allocated to the admin expenses in our traditional information system or traditional financial statement. However, by linking with the environmental part, so for example, like using the ABC related to environmental stuff and life cycle costing, we'll certainly know what drives up the costs, okay? So clearer cost insight. In terms of our investment appraisal, okay, so how it helps is that we make sure that the environmental expenses would be considered in calculating the NPV. Okay, so this means that we consider the full picture of it. These costs are quite crucial, okay, because it will easily turn the positive NPV project into a negative one. So this is why it's a detailed breakdown and to see the proportion of that and to perform, for example, the sensitivity analysis later on to make sure that we identify that how much proportion that particular cost would change so that the NPV of the project would become 0. It also helps with setting up the different KPIs as well. So for example, helping with the benchmarking exercises, such as what we've done in question 1 in the section A questions in the past. And we can also link with the non-financial KPIs. So for example, the water consumption rate. So because that's important to the industry and it's due to its scarcity. And this is why in Cayland we introduce such KPIs will be much better. As we consider multiple factors, not just from the short-term point of view in terms of profit, but also from a longer-term point of view, such as introducing those non-financial KPIs, will certainly reveal the full picture of this company, including the health implications from the WPA product exposure. In terms of product pricing, the environmental management accounting would help because firstly, it sets up a total cost, including the environmental one. So this is why when we price our product, we include that factor in. At the same time, we can explain why we charge a higher price. Okay, so because we built in the environmental factors, and this is why it will be clearer and more transparent to the stakeholders in the market that they view our product pricing will be absolutely fine and enough and it's okay. Do not think that our product pricing is too high and leading to, for example, bubbles, okay, in our performance. i.e., if they think we charge a very high price, so later on they decide to downgrade our company's rating or perhaps to discount our share price, for example, because they think that the level of return or profit that we've made will not be justified in the longer term because the price is too high currently. However, if we can explain why, which means if we can justify the premium pricing, okay, because of the environmental reasons, of course, it's absolutely fine then. Right, so making sure that for each point you can further expand your point or to relay back to the case, and this will earn you very good marks in this paper. Right, so we finish off the question, okay, for this company. Of course, in relation to professional marks, I will say that in this paper, again, that will be quite subjective. We'll need to see that whether or not you are making clear assumptions, for example, in terms of your calculations. At the same time, whether or not each of your point will be linking back with the case, and that will be absolutely enough there. Right, so happy studying. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.
APC, accounting for your future.
Let's continue our story regarding the June 2023 for the chain company. Let's continue our story with regards to part 2 of the requirement to respond to the requests, what gets measured gets done, and let's see which exhibit talks about this. And from the last section that we've talked about, from the exhibit number 3, that the CEO quotes what gets measured gets done. She wants you to explain how it might apply at the company, given its current performance report. So you need to use the exhibit number 5 information, which means the performance report, and the retail production director's issue. Okay, now the retail production director, what's the problem? So firstly, production director said he was not convinced by this retail director's initiative and that he wanted him to make sure that the retail staff, which means the sales staff, are explaining the quality of our packaging to our customers. Production director worried about the amount of products being thrown out because it's past its usable date. He wants this to be included into the Save the Planet initiative. Okay, so we need to set up KPIs regarding this issue. And at present, all the retail staff are assessed by only for general review of their work performed by their line manager. And the line manager scored the staff member under 2 headings for the sales and reliability. Sales, are you talking about from new customers or from loyal customers or existing customers? We're not particularly sure. reliability? Do you mean, I don't know what you're talking about, your attitude, or the absenteeism? We're not particularly sure. The retail director is assessed on these areas as well, but has also made additional metrics of performance related to the overall performance of the company. Alright, so it seems to me that the retail director, yes, is very interested in the bonuses in terms of sales revenue of a company and also for a profit. However, in the performance report, in the exhibit number 5, we also have got the return on capital employed, or ROCE, measure as well. And as we can see, when we are calculating ROCE, the denominator will be the capital employed, which means the total asset minus the current liabilities. Now, within that initiative, for the second initiative, which means Save the Planet, we're going to be replacing the constantly running water heaters, which means we need to update the asset. If I were to update the asset, this will push up the denominator, which will reduce the overall return on capital employed. So I would say that retail director may be reluctant on this particular issue. I mean, by simply relying on the ROCE, the retail director may refuse or very slowly to invest money in the investment. In order to make sure that the denominator in the ROCE calculation is quite low, okay, by utilizing the old asset rather than the new one, because old assets being fully depreciated, perhaps, to increase the ROCE in order to get more bonuses. And of course, this would be the disadvantage of that. Right, so make sure that your answer not only focuses on the performance report in the Exhibit 5, but also the issues from the retail production directors. However, in answering the part 2, yes, if you can remember that from our tuition, we have got the 9 headings. Okay, 9 headings is a step to make sure that you answer this requirement appropriately and to stuff with the case information. Now let me write this down. In the part 2, what gets measured gets done. The step number 1 will always, you will need to define what it means, because there will be an easy mark for that. And from step 2 onward, you will primarily be focusing on the case information. So for example, you will need to determine the KPIs or metrics from the case. And then you need to think about collecting data. Whether or not there will be data to support these issues. And then as a step further, you need to analyze what would be a current problem. In the case, for example, the missing of certain metrics. And of course, you will need to adjust the KPIs a bit further, and you will also need to review from a holistic approach point of view that certain things will not be right, and then you will need to determine the KPIs. For example, what KPIs should have been in place. And of course, perhaps you will need to collect further data regarding some missing issues, for example, the wastage. And finally, you need to suggest the overall recommendation. Okay, to the CEO. Now, nice step there, and we're given how many marks for this requirement? 14 marks. Huge marks here. So this is why you need to be very careful on that. Now, when we are defining what gets measured gets done, I will always say to the examiner that we are simply aligning activities of our business with the stated objectives. Now, there's no point in dumping knowledge from me from the study tests, but what sort of objectives are there? So, for example, you talk about the quality in terms of customer, innovation, and environmental impact. And your activities, so for example, in terms of your retail directors issue, the retail directors issue, for example, the selling and marketing activities, perhaps, and the 2 initiatives. Firstly, Save the Planet. The smiling face. Okay, it's the first initiative. In the exhibit 3, Chain Smiles, and second, Save the Planet. All right then. So we've got to define what gets measured, gets done, and this will award you 1 mark. Now, determining the KPI as the step number 2 there. So why not to read through the exhibit 5 there? So you've got variances. Okay, just pick up the variances from there. The variances, as we can say, in terms of costs, okay, yes, 153, and the staff costs, finance costs, and so on. So it seems to me that because our objective, yes, innovation in dealing with customers and getting overall revenue and so on, but it seems to me that all the budgets there for the revenue part, not too much analysis on that, but most of all will be based on the cost focus. Now, I would say that we determining the metrics from the case, from the exhibit, I would say the performance report, that is a cost focus. Okay. Now, this is why we need to collect data to support this. Okay. Now, how about the first one, the Chain Smiles, which means the initiative number 1. There'll be no KPIs at all for customer satisfaction in a case. Okay. And of course, in the initiative number 2, there'll be no, let's say, environmental costs or KPIs related to asset replacement, that kind of stuff. Now, what's the problem currently existing in the case? Yes, we've got certain problems that we can talk about, and in my answer, I talk about 3 problems there, okay, from the case. Firstly, the missing KPIs. The missing KPIs, yes, we've talked about the missing KPIs. Let's say the data collection, no KPIs for customer satisfaction or environmental costs and so on. But also KPIs regarding the shareholders' wealth and also the productivity of our staff and so on. These are quite missing. So, for example, the staff productivity is missing. Innovation is missing. And the second one I would say is that the problem is that firstly for the initiative number 1, the Change Miles initiative, what will be the impact on our revenue? So there's no analysis on that as well. So this is why what gets measured gets done. You are requiring your managers to focus on these KPIs, but managers may lose focus on other KPIs and leaving the entire organizations to fail. And also in terms of, let's say, the premium pricing strategy, adopted by the business currently, that the current problem is that we're not sure whether or not the premium pricing is effective. Although you are given the year-on-year sales growth that may indirectly imply that the customers will be quite happy with your premium price. However, we're not told about the price elasticity of demand for our products at all. So this will be one of the problems that you need to analyze there. Now, what you need to do is to adjust things. Okay. So I would say that I'll include 3 points here. So, for example, Save the Planet initiative. For example, more focus should be on the replacement of your asset. Because the investment in water heaters will be quite slow, and this is why it should be more quicker. And secondly, to address the innovation in our report, okay, so for example, in terms of R&D and the outcome of R&D, and also training expenses, we suggest the fact that we are encouraging staff to innovate. And also need to adjust, for example, adopting a focus on customers, which means customer-centric approach. So, for example, we can think about the retention rate, okay, of our key customers, satisfaction score, and so on. Now, as a step number 6 there, what gets measured gets done. We should review, is it good, okay, currently in our business. I would say that currently we are using ROCE, that we can take the operating profit and to divide this into capital employed. And because you are assessing managers based on the ROCE, because for the retail director, you can bring extra information in. The retail director will be assessed based on the ROCE, because the additional performance of the company. So this is why it's no surprise that the investment is low in asset. At the same time, I would say that why not to include the classification of environmental costing? That may help to analyze your commitment to the environment. And also to make sure that you're reviewing the activities whether or not they're aligning with the long-term goals of the shareholders. For example, the total shareholders return, and that could help, okay, as the KPI there. Again, number 7, you need to determine the metrics again, but in this case, you'll need to talk specifically about the most important case information there. Because we are talking about, for example, the production directors issue. The production directors issue, that they're not measuring the retail staff ability to communicate the product quality and benefit. So, yeah, because production director wants the retail directors to communicate to the customer that the technology is built in and innovation is built in. So the communication problems, it seems to be that the quality in KPIs is not linked with the staff salary or remuneration, I would say. That's more appropriate. So we need to determine a particular KPI regarding this. And more importantly, perhaps we will need to linking sales to marketing. So in terms of, if I were to define the marketing campaigns, for example, defining a product and pricing by including the specific elements proposed by the production director, in terms of production director saying that explaining the quality of ingredients and so on, making sure that these elements are built in the advertisement and so on, and to see whether or not the actual sales revenue will increase. So we need to see, let's say, the 4 Ps, including the product, price, place, and promotion. Make sure that you link that with the case information, okay? So about the quality of ingredients proposed by the production director, and to see the effect on the sales revenue on a constant basis. The next step, okay, is to collect data again, okay, regarding some of the missing areas. So for example, I would say that, how about wastage? Yes, the wastage, about the inventory loss, especially that you're using the premium pricing. We're not particularly sure that whether or not it will affect your sales volume, and if those products can't be sold, how are you going to be dealing with them? The inventory loss potentially. At the same time, the market analysis in terms of a market share, and in terms of your competitors' actions, yeah, you need to collect those data as well. Finally, recommend what's going on. I would say that, okay, my focus, what's your focus? Your focus, yes, objective will be very important, but based on the current case information, the more focus should be on customers by building in the KPIs, by linking the remuneration of all staff regarding the customer-centric KPIs. At the same time, the sustainability, especially the potential cost savings after implementing a sustainability initiatives, making sure that parts of that cost savings can be attributable to the staff. Okay, so that would be a recommendation that you can make sure that the staff will focus on the holistic picture of the company rather than a small segment or area of that. So what gets measured gets done. Yes, they only focus on what gets measured. But you really need to think about how about they focus on lots of other things, not just on a specific area. Because if they are focusing on just a specific area, for example, the retail director, they are not really conveying the valuable message of it, of a company to the customers, and leading to loss of revenue in the longer term. I would say that yes, number 2, we are given 14 marks here, headings, 9 headings, and make sure you bring the case information in and you can read my answer if you like. Okay, not a problem for that whatsoever. Right, I'm going to be stopping this recording now for part 2. Very difficult indeed, and I'll see you soon in the part 3 in the next of our section then. Bye bye, and best of luck.
APC, accounting for your future.
Welcome to ACCA APM past exam question go through, and we are looking at the question called chain from the June 2023 question 1 alongside with my own written answer to the question. Now, the key to pass the APM is to make sure that you write enough sentences. So for example, if you are given 10 marks, of course you need to write at least 10 sentences. But at the same time, if you're asked to evaluate or appraise something, what you need to do then is to tell the story. So for example, what's currently happening within the business, so that what is good, what is bad, and the implications or reasons, such as using the words because. I'll show you how in a minute. Now, I will break this question down into several videos for different requirements, and of course, you will see that we will be using very standardized format to answer these type of questions that appearing in the actual exam. Because as you can see that for the requirement A, you're required to write a report about the performance reporting, 10 marks, to comment on the reports that is given by the examiner. And of course, we will have our standardized format of how to answer this type of questions in each and every sitting exam. And then you're required to comment on what gets measured gets done. Of course, we will be using the same headings each and every time in each of these exams, but we are going to be linking with the actual case information there. But what's more difficult is the part 3 is about the branch survey. You'll need to apply your business common sense from there and to make sure that you've done the calculations correctly to get these marks. And of course, always in the question 1, for example, there will be professional marks in there. And of course, from my perspective, the communication mark is very important, so you need to write out the report format. So for example, you can see in my answer that the report format, for example, that would be a report, and 2 from day subject introduction. So what I would do is that I would say that this report will assess performance report, copying the requirements, okay, from the question requirement from there, and then followed by what gets measured gets done, and finally the branch survey. So that's it. So make sure that your introduction will cover all 3 requirements. Using a single paragraph will be absolutely fine there. And of course, you need to lay out, for example, regarding the requirement number 1, regarding performance reporting, but you don't really have to say the number of marks next to that. Okay, just do it for illustrative purposes, and then followed by another heading regarding what gets measured gets done. Okay, and so on and so forth, and finally give a conclusion of that. And of course, for other professional marks in the APM exam, so always bring the case information in your answer. Also, one of the very important exam techniques that you always bear in mind in the APM is that firstly, you need to raise your point of what is going on, but followed by, yes, for example, because and so that, okay, is this keyword, but what is more easy to be understood by students and to be learned by students is that currently what the case is happening. And this is why we need to change, yeah? So change so that the reasons behind it, for example, you're using the words because, we love to see that from a marker's point of view, or so that, okay, by talking about the implications, or perhaps the risk of doing that. And even you can always suggest what is going on. Of course, sometimes you may not get the technical marks regarding, for example, reasons and something like that, but you may be given, for example, the analysis and evaluation mark, A&E marks, by providing the balanced argument in your answer. For example, talking about the good thing and bad thing at the same time and so on. So this is why currently, yes, it's a very powerful tool and powerful word as well, because it will force you to think about what currently happens within the business, so some change that may be needed. Right, okay, so we are given these requirements. It seems to be quite general indeed, and we need to tailor to this particular case. You need to change your mindset here, because you're not a student any longer, but you are a consultant, and this is why that's very important now. Now, we are given the following exhibit on the left-hand side about the company information background. It's called Chain 1 Drinks, and about the performance report in the final exhibit, and what gets measured gets done. It's a request for work on how this quote will apply at the company. And we are given the survey for our brand about the details of work relating to the brand awareness. So in other words, who knows our brand and brand loyalty. So this means that if customer A buys our product, the customer A will continue to buy our product. So which means it's loyal to the business. And of course, that when you're reading that particular sentence, you need to force yourself to think about, so for example, that when not, there might be subsequent changes in the selling price that may affect your buying decision later on. You're also given the appendix number 1 is the illustrated performance report, and appendix number 2 is the extract of a consultant's report on survey results on the brand. You're given lots and lots of things there, so if you get the question 1 right, it's highly likely that you'll pass this paper with very, very high marks. Of course, the exam is the computer-based exam, so which means that you need to click on the exhibit on the left-hand side and clicking on the requirements I've just shown you before, and then you need to answer these requirements in full. So make sure that you will not miss any requirements in the actual exam. Okay, so in order to get the professional marks right. Right there, so let's read through the exhibit number 1 and so on before we answer the first requirement. So we are given the case is the unlisted company. I would say that it may be a bit aggressive, so you can expand. I would say that further you can expand your business, so you can increase your revenue potentially and finally get listed. I would say the expansion option may be one of our options, okay, in our pocket. And it's based on it's based in a country called Deland, which produces and sells specialty teas and coffees. All right, so there are 2 aspects to the business. It's the production and retail. So the production, it seems to me, is the supplier. Yes, we produce things. At the same time, we are the dealer, which means we sell to the final customer. So it means that the business is like controlling the upside as well as the downside supply chains at the same time. Now, looking at the first part, in the production parts of the business, the teas and coffees are carefully sourced by procurement team. Now, when you're reading that particular sentence, you need to raise the question why and how. So how careful it is. You just say to yourself how careful it is. Don't read too fast in your actual exam and force yourself to think that how careful it is. I would say that if I were to buy something, I like to think about the price that I need to pay and the quantity, which means how many items that I need to buy each and every time so to enjoy the trade discount, something like that. At the same time, whether or not the quality will be okay, whether or not the supplier will be reliable. For example, we will be assessing the lead time, which means the waiting times that we order from the supplier each and every time from that. So you need to see whether or not these KPIs are available. I would say that unluckily they are not available, and this is why we need to criticize the performance report later on. And we also told that a package is either dry tea leaves or coffee beans in chains, patented, resellable punches. Okay, I would say that, yeah, it'll be fine that, but these dry tea leaves or coffee beans, it seems to me that the shelf life, a bit long, and we may not need to care about, so for example, the write-down of inventories and something like that. The pouches, which have been through a 3-year development program, has been shown to retain the flavors of 50% longer than most commonly used forms of packaging. So I would say that 50% longer than other production method. I would say that it's like the benchmarking exercise, yeah. But the benchmarking exercise would say that we're comparing with the best. So I'm very interested to see later in our performance report whether or not the benchmarking exercise has been done, but luckily this has not been done. So you can also criticize that in your answer. But it's only for 50% longer, but if you were to compare with the best one in the industry, so what would that be? Right, so production part, we finished that. Now, let's continue our story. In the retail part of the business, there's a chain of shops managed by the retail director. Okay, so we've got a chain of shops. So this means that, I like to use another color. This means that we may be thinking about perhaps that is based on different types of products that we need to manage. Alternatively, based on different areas, that I'm more interested to see whether or not the performance are good or bad. So you need to see a breakdown, okay, of the revenue and cost of sales, so into different types of product or into different areas, or perhaps into different shops. And these are located in large shopping malls. Okay, it seems to me that the rental fee a bit high. Now, let me share with you my secret tip when answering the APM question. I would say that if you see a marking scheme, that yes, we need certain headings to get the basic marks. However, a lot of students fail this paper is because they are accused of dumping knowledge from the study test or test book or study notes that wherever they are studying from. My secret tip here is that for each sentence, when you're reading that case, because you will have a scratch pad, okay, on screen, and you click on that, and then when each and every time you read each of your sentence, just make sure you do it like me, what I'm currently doing is that copy that and paste that into the Scratch pattern, make a comment of that. So later on when you are answering the question and you can directly bring the case information at the same time you're commenting, and so you will score really well, because there will be a lot of subjective judgment to be applied in this paper, i.e. there will be no 100% correct answer in most circumstances. So make sure that you can use that approach. We're also told that in the shops there are displays of the pouched products for sale, and each shop has a small cafe area where customers can enjoy the changed product. I would say that this small cafe area, whether or not they will supplement our main product. And we'll see later on in our performance report, yes, we've got a cafe area as well. Moving on. Chain has a management team and VC, or venture capitalist. So what do I mean by VC? Is that there will be the institutional investors. So usually they will be quite large to invest the money into a chain company. Perhaps they are quite risky. Okay, so they are shareholders, so therefore it supports my claim that they might be a bit aggressive later on to expand the businesses further. The VC have provided additional capital needed to support the development of the pouches and also the expansion of the retail side. Okay though, so this means that money is not an issue, perhaps because we've got money or investment from the input from the large shareholders. That's the first point. And the second point is that how about the return to them? Because at this level, you always need to bear in mind that cost and benefit analysis would be very important. But at the same time, the risk and return analysis will be also very important when you are dealing with stakeholders. There's no point in communicating with your stakeholders that the return will be quite high. However, it's the risk, we ignore that, but there's no point in doing that. So always bear that in mind when you're answering the question. Bring those elements in your answer until you are demonstrating very strong business acumen knowledge from there. Now, next one then. The change strategies to maximize shareholders' wealth. Oh, okay. Now, maximize shareholders' wealth in the long term. Let's break that down. Firstly, that would be your primary objective. Yes, at this level, it's very important to identify the objective. So you've got the critical success factors coming in, and then we've got the KPIs, or at this level, we are calling this as metrics to make sure that we measuring the most important part, because the missing of those, we cannot achieve our objective later on. The objective will be the shareholders' wealth. It seems that I'm wasting time in copying this stuff, but trust me, it will not be the case. If you are doing the same thing in the actual exam, it will save you later on lots of time when coming up with high quality answers. At the same time, secondly, you notice the word is called long term. Now that's important because later on you will need to see whether or not there will be sufficient KPIs are in place in measuring the long term stuff rather than focusing on the short term. And by growing the sales of these products, which are high quality, okay, now you're showing that high quality will be another objective from there. So, for example, high quality. How to assess whether or not the quality will be high? We need to see whether or not we input enough money into the research and development phase to improve our products continuously. At the same time, we need to see the revenue from the repeated customers, because the quality is not high, so a customer buying our product once and will not buy it again. Market share. And also we need to see the defect rate of our products potentially, and to assess our the quality in terms of our production. So the quality will be built in across the entire value chain of our business. Not only that we are producing items that we emphasize the importance of quality, but also when we are buying things from the suppliers and then selling things to the final customer, after sales service, HR, human resources management, and also the technological part. We also built in the quality measures in place from there. Right, and which you can sell at a premium price. Right, now premium price, which means the high price, you always need to bear that in mind about the price elasticity of demand, or you can call it as PET. So this means that if your product's PET is greater than 1, for example, it will not be a wise choice to increase your selling price. Otherwise, there will be a larger drop in the sales volume and bringing down your overall sales revenue. So, of course, if your PET or price elasticity of demand is less than 1, because the brand is quite loyal and quite strong, it's easier for the business to increase the selling price a bit further, so a little drop in the sales volume will not stop the total revenue to increase further. So this means that you always need to bear that in mind. This exam that will be a next step, okay, advising the management. So my mindset that I always require my students to do in this paper is to always position yourself as a consultant rather than as a student. When you're reading every sentence, that you are finding it, okay, every sentence will be quite useful and informative and very, very useful for the kind to make future decisions and to treasure every sentence. Okay, so if you're having that ability, having that mindset, and highly likely that you can pass this paper. Next one then, the quality will be driven by innovation. Okay, so another objective that we need to bear that in mind, that innovation will be also very, very important there. Innovation in procurement, which means, okay, innovation when we are buying things. I would say that perhaps we are sourcing things from different suppliers and we need to be more innovative. How about demonstrating our commitment to the ESG initiative, or the environmental, social and governance perspectives and so on. Also to production method. Okay, for production method, it is not difficult to think about that innovation simply means that we need to upgrade our production methodologies and machines and processes and so on. While the premium price will be achieved by is selling and marketing. Right. Now, selling and marketing campaigns will be very important. So if I were you, I'd like to think about the selling and marketing expenses, to divide this into the sales revenue and to see the percentage, whether not compare with the previous years and even benchmark against the best one in the industry, whether not is increasing, decreasing. Okay, now that's important now. Of course, the selling and marketing campaigns, you can also think about how about the revenue from your existing customers. That may help. Okay, if I were to see that the loyal customers are keep buying our product, that's good news. Okay, so we need to see a lot of KPIs related to each of those. And of course, I would say that, let me highlight this. I would say that this would be very, very important because that relates to the part 1 of our requirement. We need to combine this with the performance report given by the examiner. Now, let's see the exhibit 2. Given a small number and close involvement of the shareholders, the main method of reporting to them is an annual report. Okay, now, what do I mean by annual report? annual report is just to be the financial statement, auditor's report, and reviews from the CEO and even chairman. And of course, we will need to explain things further by bringing the accounting policies in our annual report. But what's the point though? Of course, reading the annual report, we can determine, for example, the dividend that we pay to those shareholders and also the future strategies. However, I would say that it may not be quite effective indeed if we are simply communicating with our major shareholders through the annual report. Because they may be arguing things that why not keep investing in certain areas to make sure the capital gain will be huge, rather than offering me the same amount of dividend each and every year. Now, the change reports recently being criticised by the venture capitalists. Oh, okay, they're not happy. Although management is happy with the progress of the business. The CEO of the company spoken to the venture capitalists, who indicated that they felt the report was ineffective in achieving the principal purpose. Now, what would be the principal purpose? I would say that it would be the shareholders' wealth in the long term. Now, in the long term, it's talking about the cash flows. So cash flows method, including the NPV, economic value added analysis, EVA, so may be coming in. The CEO asks you to provide the assessment of how well the report reflects the strategy of the company. Okay, now, what would be our strategy? Our strategy, yes, there will be a lot of information from there. As you can see there, what will be the strategy? Yes, keywords popping out into our mindset. We've got innovation, we've got long-term, we've got shareholders' wealth, yes. The innovation in terms of procurement and production method. Any sort of things, yes, we've got the upstream supply chains, downstream supply chains, and we all control all of them. And at the same time, that the pouches to retain the flavors for 50% longer than other competitors, why not to benchmark against the best one in the industry? Right, what will be our other strategies? We are an unlisted company and we may be quite aggressive, or we may need to be more aggressive in order to obtain a listed status very soon. I think this will be the strategies of this company. All right, now let me show you with the final exhibit. Sorry, it's the exhibit 5, I would say. Not a final one, but it's the exhibit 5. Now, a lot of information coming in there, and this is the performance report showing the budget with the actual for this year. And then when comparing the budget with actual, as you can see there, so we have got the variance, okay, coming in. We've got the variance coming in if I were to compare the budget with the actual, which means the difference from there. And also we've got the actual information from last year, which means X4. So this is last year. And we are given the growth year on year. So this means that we compare the 20x5 actual with the 20x4. So we simply use 20x5 minus 20x4 and divide this into 20x4 information. And we can see that the revenue for our products and cafe has increased the revenue by 3.8% or 3.9%, something like that. At the same time, yes, we have got profit as a percentage of revenue, but I'm also interested to see, let's say, that what about our marketing expenses? Now, marketing expenses, sales and marketing expenses, has been included into other operating costs. So I would like to separate this out. So, for example, for the sales and marketing expenses, if I were to divide this into revenue, so it will give me the particular percentage, okay? So costs account for how much of our revenue, but this is missing because the missing of this particular KPI, we cannot really measure the performance of this company in terms of the effectiveness of our marketing and the loyalty from our customers. And also, we are given the industry average. However, a lot of things are missing from there. So, for example, in terms of revenue, so we are not given the total revenue from the industry average. How about the profit? We are not given in the industry average, okay, the gross profit. We are not given the gross profit margin from there. So it would be more sensible if you to say to the examiner that how about to benchmark this, benchmark other figures with the perfect and the best competitor in the marketplace, or benchmark against the particular functions. So, for example, the benchmarking exercise will not necessarily be to compare with our competitors, but revenue, yes, we can compare with the company in a completely different industry, but has a very similar business model with our company. We can benchmark against that company, and so on. And yes, we are given, so for example, other metrics, but we are not given any narratives at all. Narratives is missing. Okay. Now, how about for revenue? Has been broken down into chain products, but within chain products, I would say that, how about the revenue? Is it from different shops, areas? I'm not particularly sure. Why not break these down? Also, cost of sales into chain products and other cafe sales. So we're not particularly sure that we're not see different product lines are working with each other, which means selling and buying things from other product lines or from other areas. What would be the intergroup transactions, which means the transfer pricing, the internal revenue, and what would be the external revenue, and so on. So we're not seeing those figures, but we are given the final figures, so for example, the total revenue and the total cost of sales, and giving me the gross profit. But reading back to the requirement 1, that writer reports to respond to her instructions. So what will be the instructions from the exhibit 2 is to assess how well the report itself is not a company, how well the report reflects the strategy. Okay. Now, if student's answer is talking about, well, this company is doing great, okay, unluckily, no marks for that, because the examining team is asking how well the report rather than the company, whether or not it's doing great. Okay, it's the report. As we can see there, we can further break these down and to benchmark against that. Yes, we've got the variance, but yes, you can separate that into the planning variance, perhaps, and operational variances, perhaps, and to include them, how you separate them into the narrative part. Okay. And also we are given the staff cost. Yeah, staff cost is not a cost into the revenue as a percentage. We are not given that. So we're not particularly sure that, okay, so reading back to the staff cost is increased a bit and not too much differences from there. It's okay there. It's quite stable, okay, from each and every year. So what's the point? But staff costs, as we can see there, how about the innovation? If you were to, to innovate your procurement and production method, especially for production method, perhaps an increase of the bonuses paid to your staff will be needed. However, we're not told about that. But we're told about the staff absenteeism. Okay, it's the percentage of staff time lost through illness or absence. As you can see there, that the actual from last year was 4.1%, this year 4%. It seems that staff slightly motivated, perhaps, but we're not sure much about it, about whether or not the reduction of the staff absenteeism is because that they have less time lost through illness or less time lost through absence. We're not sure about that. Okay, so comment will be needed in a narrative. Okay, so the next one, yes, the other operating costs. We need to break these costs down into different categories: sales and marketing, R&D, and the irrecoverable debt, and so on. We're also given the finance costs, fine and taxes, and group profit after tax. It seems to me that we are doing great because year-on-year figure compared to last year from 20x4 to 20x5, it's been an increase of 7.4% there. But what's the point? We're not particularly sure that, yes, comparing with the past is okay, but how about to compare with our competitor? We're not particularly sure about that. We're also given another metric, okay, it's the return on capital employed, that it's very hard to measure the long-term shareholders' wealth, okay? I'll put a cost next to that. Because as you can see, the return on capital employed, the numerator return, will be based on the accounting profit. The accounting profit can be subject to be manipulated by management. At the same time, the profit itself would just be a short-term measure. It's based on the yearly financial statements result, okay, to calculate that profit. Right, we got dividend paid. At least from my perspective, in order to measure long-term wealth of the shareholders, why not disclose the dividend yield? We're going to be taking that dividend payment, divide this into yield, which means the share price. Okay, so it simply takes the dividend per share and to divide this into the share price. And of course, why not include other measures such as the capital gain, which means you use the share price from this year minus the share price from last year and divide this into the last year's share price. Of course, the dividend yield plus capital gain altogether, this would be the total shareholders' return, or you can call it as the TSR. Why not include them in the report? You're not seeing that. Okay, now let's see the Save the Planet initiative. Right, so what will be the initiative? Let's read through the case. How about the Exhibit 3? At a recent board meeting, the retail director reported on 2 initiatives. Initiative, which means plans within the shop operations. And the first initiative is called Chain Smiles. The director complains that the shop staff are not responding well to his attempt to encourage them to interact more often and more positively with customers. And of course, if this is the case there, if they're not smiling, okay, when they are facing customers, it may affect their revenue. And this is why they need a new initiative called Chain Smiles initiative. However, there's a more positive response to the second initiative called Save the Planet. All right. Which is his reasoned drive to save electricity. It seems to me that demonstrating the ESG initiative or commitment by getting all shop staff to turn off unnecessary light and for shop managers to replace constantly running water heaters with new ones which only heat water as required. Alright, so you turn off unnecessary light and this will certainly save the light and heat expenses. It's fine there. At the same time, you need to replace constantly running water heaters. Okay, it's like you keep investing money in that. It's like the asset replacement. However, the retail director noted that the replacement of water heaters was progressing slowly with some reluctance by shop managers to make the change. Alright, so reluctance by shop managers. Seems to me that managers are not buying that decision at all. What's the point? I don't know. How about salary? Bonuses? They're not happy. The production director responded that he was not convinced by the retail director's initiative. Okay, now production director is not happy. So we've got the production side and also the retail side. Okay, production director is not happy. And that he wanted him to make sure that retail staff are explaining the quality of ingredients sourced and the benefits of the new packaging to customers. Okay, so we are thinking about why not to include this into our marketing campaign. Into our advertisement. This may increase the sales and marketing expenses perhaps, or at least the time that we need to spend on this particular area. The production director is also particularly worried about the amount of products which has been thrown out because it's past its usable date, and he wants this included into Save the Planet initiative. So it means that the amount of product, okay, just let's copy that, whether or not it's being included into Save the Planet initiative. Of course, the answer for that is no, because Save the Planet initiative, we are only told about the electricity costs, but we are not told about two things. For example, the amount thrown. At the same time, the replacement, okay, of the asset are missing. We're told in the next paragraph that at present that all retail staff, including managers and retail director, are assessed by way of a general review of their work performed by their line manager. All right, and the line manager has to score the staff member on a 1 to 5 scale under two headings: sales and reliability. The retail director is assessed on these areas as well, but also has additional metrics of performance relating to the overall performance of the company, which are similar to the rest of the board. And the board scores the retail director's performance. It seems to me that's quite fine there. Okay. The CEO was at a recent Business Directors Forum. The quote, "What gets measured gets done," was mentioned numerous times in the context of performance management. She wants you to explain how this might apply at the company given its current performance report and retail production directors issues. Of course, we'll answer them in the part 2 later on in the next of our recording. Now, I've summarized all the things here, as you can see there on the screen, but the next step that you need to do from my perspective is to use a very standardized approach to answer when we are criticizing or evaluating the performance report. Now, this is quite consistent in each and every exam sitting. Now, in the part 1 there, so the final part, I will be bringing this into the CBE environment, but let's write them down firstly. It's all about the performance report is evaluated. Now, firstly, it's evaluated from the quantitative point of view, which means in terms of numbers. And secondly, it's evaluated from the narratives point of view, which means in terms of words. Now, 10 marks, of course, we need to write 10 sentences. For each sentence or each paragraph, I would suggest about at least 15 words, so 15 words to approximately 30 words into a single paragraph there, okay, in the APM exam. Now, when talking about the quantitative part in terms of numbers, it's very important that we need to touch whether or not that this is relevant to our objectives. That's the first part. And then we need to comment on how about the data, whether or not it's complete, and whether or not that would be appropriate. A very, very standardized format, so we need to use each and every time from my perspective, although my answer will be completely different from the examiner's answer, but my answer, as you can see there, I've analysed the case, I've used the standardised format, and we copy and combine these all together, and you will score very high marks in the actual exam. And how about the presentation? The quality of presentation, you can think about whether or not it link the financial data to the objective. If this is not the case, there's no point in writing me the report at all. And also we need to see, finally, the comparison. So not just with last year, but with the industry average in detail, and also with the competitor or benchmarking exercises from other companies of a similar function. For the narrative part, I would say that whether or not it's quite clear. Okay. So, for example, whether or not you've written words, some words to convey the message of how to, for example, the variances into planning operational ones and so on. At the same time, whether or not there will be any other recommendations, okay, putting in to your report. Now, you don't really have to explain what do I mean by objective. You don't really have to do that, because at this level, as a marker, we are more interested in seeing whether or not you are answering the requirement, and whether or not you are positioning yourself as a consultant, offering very valuable advice to the client. And this is what we are trying to assess in your answer. Now, I would say that whether or not it's relevant to the objective, that firstly, from the case information, that we have got the long-term shareholders' wealth, we have got quality, we have got innovation. Okay, so these sort of things. And we have got the premium pricing. Okay, this is your objective from there. Yes, the objective, that's it. But it seems to me that the objective sometimes is not very clear or clearly seen from the performance report, because you can say that, okay, it's what is currently in the report, okay, it's not very clearly seen from the report. Why? Because, okay, for long-term shareholders' wealth, yeah, I'll bring them there. For long-term shareholders' wealth, we only have got the dividend payment, not TSR, total shareholder returns. The quality, no measures in place. Innovation, no R&D and no such things and so on. Premium pricing, no. Yeah, we're not seeing the price elasticity of demand, and also breaking this down into price and volume, we're not seeing that. Right, so to comment on the data, whether or not they're complete and appropriate, I would say that firstly, and pick up a few points to comment on. Yeah, we've got the growth year on year. We've got the growth YOY year on year. At the same time, we've got the profit into sales revenue. Okay, however, the growth year on year, I'd like to mention that case currently what will be a challenge is that no breakdown of our selling price and sales volume at all. At the same time, no expenses into sales revenue at all. That will be a problem there. Yes, I've mentioned that there will be no other metric. It's entirely up to you that you include that into the objective headings in your answer. Alternatively, you can include them into the second part. Okay, so it's not quite appropriate, it's not quite complete at all. Okay, you can tell the examiner about that. Now, how about presentation quality? Have you linked your financial data to objective? I would say that you can comment on it's a poor presentation. Because there will be no links between financial data and objectives in some cases. And of course, I've mentioned about the long-term shareholders' wealth, quality, innovation, and premium pricing. So in terms of other areas, how about the effectiveness of our sales and marketing? Yes. So for example, the effectiveness of sales and marketing, there's no breakdown from the operating costs from there. So whether or not we can further expand our business, the market expansion is questionable, of course. At the same time, I would say that giving me the variances, it seems to be everything is quite well, but the variances, for example, no separation into the uncontrollable, which means the planning variances, and the controllable ones, operational variances, at all. Or at least, from my perspective, why not to benchmark against the best in the industry and something like that? You can always comment on that. Comparison, yeah, you can say about the good thing. Yes, we've got the year-on-year comparison, which means compare with the previous year's figures. It's okay. However, what is not okay is that you only compare with the industry average, but not to benchmark against the best in the industry. Okay. Now, of course, you can always think about when you're benchmarking things, you can think about the competitors, the best way in the market, or the best function in the industry. The best function in terms of, for example, procurement, or be your detail costs, of your procurement exercises, the innovation, or be your detail costs in terms of your R&D. Okay. You can always think about them in the actual exam there for a comparison stuff. Finally, for the narrative part, okay, so whether or not you think that's quite clear, I would say that not clear enough, because there will be no mention or no narrative about the challenges and your strategic responses at all. Your recommendation, so for example, you can bring a lot of stuff in there. So for example, the things that I've mentioned, I don't want to copy that or duplicate that in the exam. However, I will also say to the examining team that regarding the Save the Planet initiative, okay, so includes metrics or KPIs for Save the Planet initiative in terms of the amount thrown, the product, at the same time the replacement of your asset, okay, the cost that you need to spend in each and every time, okay, to replace the heaters and something like that. Yes, so you can tell the examiner about those, and yes, making sure that you follow the ways like this, and it will certainly make your answer look more professional each and every time. Right there, okay, so I'm going to be stopping the recording now, because this is not the first time that this requirement is tested. It's commonly tested nowadays in the APM exam, so make sure get the formats right, and make sure that you read the requirements right, read every sentence, and to apply them in your answer. And you will see how marvelous that could be to improve the number of marks that you can get in your answer. I'm going to be stopping the recording now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one when we come to part 2, what gets measured gets done. Bye-bye.
APC, accounting for your future.
Continuing on our story, and let's now focus on the final requirements, okay, of the question. We are given 16 marks here to comment on the brand survey. Now, firstly, let's read through the exhibit number 4 there. We're told Chase Board commissioned a survey relating to a brand. As the venture capitalists believe it is key to growing the profitability of a company. The survey was completed by a consultant from an industry-leading marketing business, and the CEO considers the source to be reliable. Okay, so this means that you don't really need to question and challenge the source and the survey done by the consultant. Okay, no marks by doing that. An extract of the relevant details is given in the appendix number 2. We'll see that later on. And the CEO is puzzled by a number of elements in the report and asks you to answer a number of detailed questions that she has about it. So this means that this will be a detailed requirement. Okay, so you need to copy them in your answer. Firstly, explain how brand awareness, which means customer knows the brand, and loyalty, which means customer prefers to buy the product because of this brand, interact to benefit the company. Of course, brand awareness, we know the brand, but we don't necessarily have to buy the product from it. But loyalty does necessarily mean that the market share may be increased. Okay, so if the brand is quite loyal among different customers. She also likes you to illustrate your answer by using a data to produce a revenue forecast. Firstly, assuming brand is no impact, and secondly, assuming that brand will have an impact. Okay, so we need to show them in our answer. Number 2, explain what standard deviation means. Standard deviation, yes, relatively straightforward concept. So this means that we should not really simply rely on the mean or the average figure. We should consider the level of risks or volatility of cash flows regarding it. In the context of this report, okay, we'll see that later on in the appendix, and assess the importance to the result. Okay, now, I got several requirements, total at 16 marks. Let's break this down again. So that's very, very important from my perspective. You can't miss any single information, because now at this paper, you are the management consultant or perhaps the management accountant. So you will be given lots and lots of information. You need to break them down. So, number 1, brand awareness, loyalty, revenue forecasts into 3.1, 3.2, and then number 4, deviation, number 5, importance. Actually, it's like 6, yes, requirements, sub-requirements into a single requirement here. And therefore, you're given 16 marks. I think that's quite reasonable. Now, let's read through the exhibit number 6 though. We're given the extract of the consultant's report on the survey results on the brand. Now, we got the market. The market for the product of our company is 225, where there are 5 is not in numbers but words, 5, which means 5 competing brands in this market, and about equal market share. So what do we mean by equal market share? If I were to take the total revenue in the market, divide this into 5 competitors, yes, it's like 45 million here. So with equal market share, so we assume we have $45 million revenue from this segment of brand. And the brand is a differentiator in the consumer's purchasing decision. So this means that this is a perfect explanation of the brand loyalty. They can explain to the examiner. Now, we're given brand awareness, which means whether or not customer knows the brand. What do you mean by knows the brand? In terms of what product or services that the company is selling, and the price, and the place, etc. Okay, knowing the brand. Aware of the brand, the mean score, mean, which means on average, is about 2.9, and the standard deviation is 1.7. So it means that some customer knows us, but some customer does not know us at all. So which means the actual figure could be, first you've got mean, and mean plus standard deviation, which will be 4.6 to maximum score. So minimum score is like 2.9 minus 1.7 equals to 1.2 is the minimum score. Okay, somewhere between 1.2 to 4.6. Okay, so that will be the brand awareness score. And so we are told the percentage of the sample surveyed who indicated that at least a basic awareness of a brand is 64%. So this means that, let's say that we survey 100 people, 64%, which means 64 out of 100 people know our brand. So this means that 100% minus 64, the remaining of 36% people do not know the brand at all. Okay, so make sure that you highlight that figure when you are reading the case. Very, very important indeed. Next one, method of measurement. The awareness level is measured on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being unaware, okay, know nothing about the company and brand, and 5 being immediately recognizable. Okay. A score of 2 shows a basic awareness of the changed brand. Okay, so more than 2 will be the passing mark. And as we can see there is a mean of 2.9, so it means that, it's like we pass the 2 criteria. Because 2 scores will be the passing mark. However, we can't simply rely on the mean, because simply relying on the mean may be distorted by the extreme result. Okay, so for example, if we got 2 people here, 1 giving us a score of 1, and the second one giving us a score of 5. Okay, so if that's the case, then we calculate the average or the mean. We take 1 plus 5 and divide this into 2. The mean would be 3, but actually 1 is the score of 1, the second is the score of 5. The extreme result will not be reviewed by the mean figure. Now let's comment on the result by the examining team that the company is a high basic recognition of the brand with a large spread of the result. I think that's quite sensible and reasonable, because the standard deviation, yes, let's say that 1.7 divided into 2.9, approximately 50% of the mean. I would say that large spread of the result. It's okay then. Now let's see the brand's loyalty. It's been broken down into 3 categories. They not really care about the brand in the purchasing decision. and the brand being a minor positive factor in a purchasing decision, and the brand being the major positive factor in the purchasing decision. So we're going to be seeing that the first category comprises 25% of the sample, and they're found to be 20% likely to choose the company from among the 5 brands available in the country. Next one is comprising 50% of the sample and 50% likely to choose the brand. Finally, it's 25% of the sample, 80% likely to choose the brand. Now, what we need to do then is to perform the revenue forecasts, okay, because of this brand. We're also told, okay, finally, is that who score at least 2 in the test showing the basic awareness and comment on the result is that stronger loyalty compared to other brands, and the survey uses the industry standard technique and so on, have a large enough samples. Okay, so we are not required to challenge the sample at all, but we need to answer the question. But firstly, let me show you the calculation there. Now in the number 3 there, a bit complicated indeed in terms of calculation. We're going to be seeing the revenue forecast. Because of his brand. Now, we're going to be splitting that into 2 categories. Firstly, without the brand impact, so which means the total market revenue will be split into 5 competitors equally. Now, this we're told about our revenues 2 to 5 million and 5 competitors. So this means that 2 to 5 into 5. So revenue will be 45 million there without the brand impact. Now, with the brand impact, on the other hand, I would say that this will be further broken down into 3 categories, okay? As I just told you before, did not really care, but yes, in a sample, 25%, and out from which 20% would be buying our product, even though they do not know our brand, etc. And we need to estimate that revenue impact. Now, what do I mean by 3 categories? First category is did not really care. Second category is minor positive impact. I say minor impact. And the third category will be the major impact. So firstly, what do I mean by did not really care? So as we are told that the basic awareness is 64%, okay, in a sample of our brand. So this means that did not care. I think that did not care, which means firstly we got unknown, not knowing our brand at all. Secondly, did not care, uncare. Did not really care about our brand at all. Now, unknown our brand will be, yes, 36%, as we just calculated, is 100% minus 64, and that would be 36% there. Uncare of our brand, I would say that out of that 64% there will be 25% did not really care about it. Okay, so 64%, 25%. Out from that 64, will not really care about it, which means 16% now. So basically, total at 52%. Now, 52%, out from that 52%, 20% likely to choose our product. Now, the total market revenue will be 225. So revenue from this segment will be 23.4 million. Number two then, if it is minor impact, let's see then, the minor impact. Now, the second one, the minor impact, okay, so 50% of the sample will be 64%, okay, that has a basic awareness of a brand. Out from that, 50%, okay. Another 50%, okay, from the 50% of the 64 will be to choose a brand. So times by another 50%, times by a total market revenue of 225, becoming 36 million. Major impact, yes, of that 64%, 25 out from that. And out from that, 80% are likely to choose. So please do make sure that you show this in the Excel calculator. 28.8 million. So total revenue will be 88.2 million. And to compare with the situations that we only have got 45 in the first case, that there would be an increase in revenue of 43.2 million. Okay, as a result of this brand. So make sure that you're ready. Okay, make sure that you're ready. Now, reading my answer here, because in this requirement, you are required about, I would say that 6 particular stuff, okay? Brand awareness, loyalty, is to explain. Brand awareness, which means helping customers to understand your brand and prices and why it's important, because that will be a starting point then, okay? Because it will not guarantee financial gains, but it will certainly influence the purchasing decision. It will be the first step that before you can sell your product. Also, you say to the examining team that the brand loyalty, answering the second part of your answer, that it really differentiates your product from your competitors and having financial impact, which means selling your product to customers because the customer prefers to buy from you. At the same time, if your brand loyalty is quite strong, usually that the profit margins of your product will be significantly higher than your competitors. It's quite common because your brand is quite loyal among customers. So this means that you can easily increase your selling prices a bit further and the customers still buys from you. And a lot of times that if your brand is quite loyal, you'll be relying on the word of mouth marketing. So this means that it will further push up the profit margin of your product because you're not incurring quite lots of expenditure, okay, to support your revenue from there. And of course, I would say that the revenue impact, okay, by assessing that, it will certainly illustrating the brand awareness as well as the loyalty. And as you can see there, because of your brand, by performing the revenue impact calculations, you can read them on your own, that you will increase additional $43.2 million as a result, because you're showing all the calculations in the Excel, such as what I've done for you. At the same time, you're saying to the examining team that if the brand is no influence in the market and you are saying that the original position will be 45 million that you can share from the total revenue in the market. But I would say that if the brand has no influence at all, so equally split among 5 competitors, this assumption may not be correct there. So this means that I would say that how about the revenue I can share without the brand would just be 20 million. So if that's the case, then instead of increasing by 43.2, I'm actually increasing by $63.2 million because I've got a brand there. You can make the assumption there to challenge that. At the same time, that the brand unaware segment, that we may face a market proportion that customers are equally likely to choose any brand. And so this means that it enhances brand awareness among these individuals. So this means that for the 36%, okay, so they do not really know about our brand at all, so whether or not we simply ignore that market, perhaps the answer for that is no. At the same time, for each segment, we calculate the size by multiplying by the total market value by the proportion of customers in that segment. It's very important that you detail that into different segments in your business. And revenue calculation by segment will be important, and to compute the financial impact, okay, of each of the segments in turn also be important. Now, the final requirement to comment on the standard deviation there. Yes, we talk about the definition. It's just to be the variability in terms of your the scores, okay, deviated from your mean. So high standard deviation, which means will be very risky, and there will be no point simply relying on the mean. Showing you the example of the extreme result will distort the mean. Okay, so for example, 50% score 1, 50% score 5. Okay, so which means that the mean will be 50% times by 1 plus 50% times by 5. That would be 3. The mean will be quite high, but actually, only 50% scoring 5, but a lot of them scoring 1. So this means that this mean has been distorted by the extreme lowest and highest result. So we show the calculation, how we calculate the standard mean, so which means that showing you the calculation there. So for example, based on the previous example, I assume that 50% scoring 1, 50% scoring 5, so which means that put a square root, 50%, which means 0.5, times by scoring 1 minus the mean for the power of 2, and plus 0.5, 5 minus 3 for power of 2. The mean will be 2 from there. And it's quite significant, okay, because you understand the standard deviation is quite high, and you need to focus on the low awareness, okay. So possibly that there might be a lot more people in the market who do not really know about your brand at all. So making sure that the scores may change all the time. So making sure that high standard deviation, so this means that it would be quite risky for a business that you may be running a risk of low brand awareness, okay, in some cases. So make sure that you have enough funding in place to make sure that the marketing campaign will be developed and to focus on the low market awareness customers. Right there, okay, so that's the question here. Now, let's bring the question in the CBE format and CBE environment and to log in to the ACCA's website. Firstly, as you can see on my screen, you will see different exhibits and word processor. The first step I will always do will be to copying the requirements via the report. Okay, so we've got headings here. copying all of them, Control C, okay, close that window, and then clicking on the word processor and Control V. Okay, now I would like to have a report format to the CEO to respond. Okay, now we've got the first requirement, second requirement, and the third requirement. I would say that firstly, you need to make sure that to CEO from, okay, the accountant or management accountant, and date would be the exam date, and subject would be you just copy that, okay, performance report, comma, what gets measured gets done, and branch away, comma, okay, and then introduction. This report, I mean, we are told to respond, okay, this report explains, branch away, requested by CEO in detail. That's it. And then making sure that you will, click on bold, the heading, underline this. When you finish writing, just get rid of the marks, okay. Of course, the branch survey, as I said before, you need to click on the exhibit, for example, the branch survey, and the CEO is puzzled and you need to explain things. Control C, Control V again, and to copy that. So explain, okay. Explain the brand awareness, brand loyalty, okay, just to delete that. Illustrate your answer using data to produce a revenue forecast. So firstly, assuming brand has no impact. Secondly, has an impact, and explain what standard deviation means. Okay. In the context of this report, assess the importance of to the result. Okay, just making sure that explain how. Okay, right. I would like to use subheadings. Okay, subheadings. Revenue forecast. Firstly, secondly, I will use another heading. Okay, by clicking on the italic, so each heading should be different. And then standard deviation, right, the importance to result. Okay, now planning my answer, make sure, yes, for example, what gets measured gets done. Yes, use the 9 steps approach. And also performance reporting, as we seen before, yes, we have got the quantitative and the narrative part, okay, 6 points from there. So make sure that you're ready when planning the answer. And of course, when we are reading the case, we've got a scratch pad here. For example, clicking on the complete information, yes, I will say that complete information, when we are reading that, just make sure the window fits. By dragging this here. Okay, so when we are reading that, okay, you just copy that into the scratch pad. So this is the first exhibit, company information. We were reading that sentence. Just copy that. I'll say the first sentence, adding your thought here, and second sentence, adding your thought here. So when we are answering the question, okay, so always bring, rather than just click on the exhibit again, but if I were you, I would like to copy information from the scratch pad, okay, so by linking that, okay, with the answer. So that's the secret tip I would like to share with you. Because as we can see that the professional marks in this paper will be quite subjective indeed. But students can easily get these professional marks by simply relate their answer to the particular case information. That will be no problem for that whatsoever. Just copying all the exhibit in the scratch pattern. When we are answering the question, okay, just make sure that you refer it back to the thought and the case information from there. And that will be the first step there. Of course, the performance report again. You just copy that. Okay, the number 2 is the performance report. Okay, just copy that. In terms of appendix, for example, now we have got all the calculation here as the data here, but we are not required to calculate that in terms of the performance report in this case. So we just close that window. However, in the appendix number 2 there, you're given these figures. So it's important there that you done the calculation in the Excel spreadsheet. So for example, in terms of answering the revenue forecasts requirements, as we've seen before, that you're saying to the examiner, all in $1 million. Okay, so that's very important as a starting point. And firstly, no brand impact at all. So we simply be equals to the 2 to 5 million divided this into 5. That's 45. So if I were you, because I also marked the ACCA's exam paper as well, but not for this paper. So I know exactly how the software works. When we are marking the script, that yes, we are given the Excel from a student, but we are not given many cells like what you are seeing currently on the screen. So each and every time I check the calculation, I need to click on that figure and to see whether or not to apply the formula correctly from there. It's absolutely fine there. However, a more viable approach I would say to my students would be to help the marker a bit further. No brand impact, I will simply be using the revenue in the market into 5 competitors. Okay, so if that's the case then, okay, yes, the marker, yes, sometimes knows exactly how you calculate that figure, and making that comment will help the marker a bit further, okay, in terms of your calculations. I hope this helps. And don't show me, for example, 2 to 5 million, divide this into 5, because you will end up having no result at all. Alternatively, equals to 2 to 5 million dollars, divide this into 5, no result at all. So make sure in the cell, it only includes figures 2 to 5 into 5. That will be 45 there. And all in $1 million. Of course, all the underlying this, okay, Control B and Control U will certainly help to make your answer look neatly and possibly scoring more marks by logs. Right, so that's how the question works in the CBE environment. I'm going to be stopping the tape now for the entire question. Well, it's a huge question, I would say. Very challenging and interesting indeed. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.
APC, accounting for your future.
Welcome. Now let's go through the question called a cake company. Now, a cake manufacturing. So we are given 50 marks in this question to write a report to the CEO again and on the following areas regarding the performance reporting and the EVA, okay, economic value added. We need to show the calculations on that. And also performance hierarchy split into strategic, tactical and operational of a business, and also the value chain analysis by the consultant. We're also told about 10 marks for professional. Now, ACCA Manufacturing is a world-leading listed manufacturer of production machinery for other industries. Right. It has customers in the mining, cement and chemical sector and seeks to provide them with the equipment, software and service of their products. It's fine now. And the aim of the company is to maximize shareholders' wealth. Again, yes, we need to tell the example about the total shareholder return again, by providing the world-class tailored automation solutions, which is technology innovatively and show improved machine downtime and reduce energy consumption for customers. Okay, you can see that world-class is to see the market share and the quality measures, and it's all tailored. Okay, so which means we need to see the detailed customer base on that. And innovation, yeah, we need to see the R&D, research and development, and the machine downtime, we need to see the evidence from that. And the energy consumption, we need to see in the management commentary in particular. And this is supported by the entrepreneurial culture among all employees who should treat the business as if they owned it. So in other words, we need to treat the human beings, okay, the human resources in our business correctly, and to make sure that we treat them as the assets to our business. And we see for example, the staff turnover, that kind of stuff. In the exhibit 2, we're told about strategic internal performance reporting. There's been criticism about the current performance by one of our directors at the board meeting. However, the CEO believes that reporting system which he put in place 2 years ago is an excellent one in preparation for the next board meeting, and the CEO needs evaluation of the current report. So as an example, a recent report used by the board is given in the Appendix 1, and the CEO stressed that it was the report but not the performance of the company should be evaluated. So again, very similar to the questions that we've gone through before, is to criticise or to evaluate the report. We also talked about the Exhibit 3 about the economic value added, a bit difficult indeed in terms of calculation. And all the criticism about the performance management of the company was that it lacked an overarching measure of the performance. As a result, the CEO is considering the introduction of the EVA to replace the ROCE. Now, I would say that ROCE is based on accounting profit. However, the EVA actually is like cash. A bit different there, okay, so make sure they're ready. Of course, in terms of ROCE, you can compare with different companies. However, for EVA, maybe it's harder for you to compare with other companies in turn, because different companies will have different capital structures. And also the weighted average cost of capital will be quite different there. A CEO wants to present this idea at the next board meeting, and so needs an illustrative calculation of the EVA along with a brief explanation of its benefit as a replacement of the ROCE. And we are told about in the appendix number 2 about the data inside. Now, in terms of Exhibit 4 there, so we are told about the performance hierarchy. The earlier work requested focuses on the strategic level of the organisation, and the CEO is keen to ensure that other levels of the business, which means the tactical, operational, are not ignored in this discussion. I would say that yes, it's important that you set the strategy right, but at the same time you know how to compete with your competitors, which means the tactical part, making sure that the medium-term budgets are put in place, and the operational in terms of different departments, you allocate enough resources correctly. However, before undertaking any specific work, he wants to make a presentation at the next board meeting. Therefore, he wants you to provide him with a brief description of the nature of the information required for performance measurements at these 3 different levels. And this is why, in the next of our requirement, we'll need to detail that in turn and to explain how this information is influenced by the planning and controlling activity at each level Okay, so there will be two sub-requirements there. He wants examples which would be relevant to the companies to illustrate this point. Right, so making sure that you bring the example from the case into that. Now, finally, we are also told about the value chain. In the Exhibit 5, in order to analyze the operational aspects of the company, the CEO has employed a consultant to produce a value chain analysis, showing the Appendix 3. The value chain analysis is highlighting certain critical activities within the company where there was concern about the performance management aspect. Okay then, a CEO wants you to assess the performance management implications for the consultant's comment on the critical areas identified for the company. Now, firstly, we're told about the strategic performance report. As you can see, very similar to what we've seen in the past. Okay, very similar to what we've seen in the past. However, in terms of the format, we can see that the mining, cement, chemicals, and the total, previous year total, but we are not told about any changes in that in percentage. We're not sure about that, and also certain industry average figure is missing. Now, the revenue growth, but we are not showing the last 3 years, and we can see the orders and also the revenue, okay, and also net profit, the net profit margin, ROCE. Also, how about costs? We're not told about that. Okay, you can comment on those. Regarding a commentary, the ROCE is increased, and revenues fallen, order book grown, and net profit margin increased, and emphasizes the entrepreneurial culture to employees. However, making that commentary, yes, you would say that it's not a balanced argument. You're not talking about the upside and downside at the same time, not talking about the risk at all, not benchmarking against the industry average figures, and very vague, because for number 4 there, so how you emphasize the culture in terms of the staff turnover, whether or not they're happy, staff happy rate or satisfaction rate. You're not measuring those at all. You're not saying anything. Now, for the part 1, as you can see, my answer is that firstly, it's not really aligned with the business goal. Okay, no shareholders measure at all, no quality at all, and the employees' culture is quite vague. So in terms of clarity and usability, so firstly, for the financial metrics, I would say that it lacks benchmarking against a competitor, and no, for example, previous years or the 3 years average, okay, for comparison purposes. I would say that at least 3-year data range should be ready for that. And in terms of the presentation, I would say that it's quite lucid, and we've got quite vague reports. In terms of commentary, okay, this is not a balanced argument, so there will be lots of rooms that you need to improve your performance later on. So very, very standardized requirements across each and every exam. However, in terms of the EVA calculation, things get a bit more difficult here. Okay, so what we need to do then is to read the exhibit number 2 and we need to perform the calculations later on. In terms of the EVA, what you need to do is that in the exam, you need to show that in the spreadsheet. Okay, so this is why I had to do this with you here. Number 2 is all about the EVA. Now, first thing, I will need to calculate the net operating profit after tax, or NOPAT for short. So once we've calculated a NOPAT, okay, on a separate column here, I would like to calculate the capital employed and leave a few columns. Finally, I would like to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. Because the ways that we calculate the EVA is that we use NOPAT, or net operating profit after tax, and less capital employed times by weighted average cost of capital. So show this calculation to the examining team, and then later on we'll insert the numbers in. Now, when we are calculating net operating profit after tax, so usually we'll be starting with the operating profit. Now, because it's after tax, and this is why we need to see that, because it's the operating profit, yes, operating profit is after tax. So because in the EVA calculation we deem that if I were to take on debt, I will need to pay interest. Pay interest, that's good for a business. Okay. However, in terms of the calculation such as this, we need to less the interest tax savings. So, in other words, so we are actually losing that tax savings on interest, because in the past we've got the interest expense deducted. So from the interest expense we can enjoy tax savings on that. However, in terms of the EVA calculation, we'll deem that interest is good, and this is why we'll never save tax on that interest, because we plot that interest back, and this is why we never save tax on that. So after we computed the tax savings because of the interests, we'll need to adjust for the non-cash items. Okay, so we'll see different non-cash items later on. And of course, in terms of the capital employed, we'll need to adjust the opening balance, if we are given about that. And then we'll need to adjust for any changes during the year, okay, to the opening balance. And for the weighted average cost of capital, so we'll see that later on. Now, we're told about the operating profit 3,175. Okay, now, so we show all the calculations in $1 million. Okay, so 3,175. And it includes the depreciation charge of 1,780. Okay, so what we need to do then is that we treat that depreciation as a non-cash item. So we need to plot this back 1,780 there. So why are we going to be plotting this back? The reason will be very straightforward indeed, because depreciation expenses are not cash expenses. So this is why the depreciation has been deducted from the accounting profit. In terms of cash profit, we need to plot this back. Of course, later on we'll need to subtract the actual depreciation. And in the EVA calculation, we are saying that it would be the economic depreciation. We need to subtract them. Amortization of 95, we need to subtract them as well. So amortization of 95, we need to add this back, okay, because subtracting accounting profit, adding this back there. And we're told about the tax rate of 25% there. Okay, now 25%. So how about the interest paid during the year? I'll say the interest paid during the year, 213, but actually the 213 for interest paid, because after tax, okay, so we are actually saying that we're completely ignoring the interest paid calculation there in terms of the operating profit calculation, because this operating profit is like the PBIT profit before interest and tax, so before deducting any interest at all. But we can't enjoy the tax savings on the interest because we are treating that interest will be very good there. So that equals to a tax rate of 25% and times by the interest of 213, that gives me 53.25 there. Okay, so what we need to do then is we need to put a minus on top of that. Right, now, there's after tax, we need to pay tax of 694. So, we need to pay tax minus 694 there. The company spent $90 million this year, and each year, so this means that this year that we spend 90, and for the previous 10 years we spent 90. Okay, so this year, so each and every year we spend 90 on the long-term bonds building. Okay, so it's like the marketing expenditure. I would say that in the EVA calculation, that something's good for a company's future, we need to reverse the effect, which means in terms of accounting profit, we have already subtracted the $90 million of the marketing expenses. However, in the EVA calculation, I would say that why not to capitalize it instead of treating it as the expense, because that 90 would be good for a business. We treat that as the asset. So this is why, firstly, the marketing expense, we now need to capitalize it. So in other words, we need to plot 90 related to this year. However, in terms of the capital employed, for those changes, I would say that the marketing capitalized is for 10 years. So if it's for 10 years, so I would say that 90 times by 10, and that would be 900. Okay, so we need to plot them back for the accumulated balance there. Because in terms of the capital employed, we are actually talking about the equity of a business. Therefore, because we have already deducted that 90 from the accounting profit and equity has been reduced by 90, over those 10 years, we shouldn't deduct those 90, okay, from the EVA calculations point of view. And this is why the equity needs to increase by 10 years times by 90 for each year, increased by 900 there in total. Right, okay, so tick for those. We also talked about the economic depreciation, 1907. Okay, now economic depreciation there, so less economic depreciation. How much? 1907. Okay, use minus rather than the bracket in the Excel. This year, each year for the previous 10 years, economic depreciations included $10 million of write-down of the value of the bond building. Okay, so it seems to me that the value has been coming down. It's like the write-down of a bond building. So this means that we have already included that 10 in the economic depreciation because we have already deducted 1907 already. There's no need to double counting it in the NOPAT calculation any longer. However, in terms of the capital employed, that we need to show the economic depreciation there. Okay, for 10 years, for each year, that will be 10, the write-down of its value, okay, the marketing capitalized expenditures, so write-down of those values, 10 times by 10 years, put a minus next to that, will be minus 100 there. We also told about the R&D cost of 705, okay, was deducted from accounting profit. We to add this back to the EVA or NOPAT calculation there. So the R&D, we should add back 705 there. Leading to the economic asset of 42.33 at the year end. So we're not particularly interested in that particular item there for the year end figure. However, we are more interested in what would be the opening balance, because I would say that opening balance, we adjust for the change during the year of 705, that leaves us to 4233, the closing balance. So this is why it's the opening balance. We take 4233 minus 705. We need to include this back to the adjustments of the opening capital employed, okay, in the calculation there. So in terms of the R&D, okay, the capital employed, the R&D, we need to take the 4233 and minus 705. That leaves us 3528 there. Right. What will be the next point? Okay then. Okay, tick for all of those. So make sure that you adjust each of the figures in your answer. I would say that in our marking scheme that we have got something called the own figure rule, or OFR. So this means that we'll check each of your figure whether or not that's correct. If it's correct, we give 1 mark. However, we're not sure that whether or not we should plot 705 or minus 705. So if that's the case, then show 2 possibilities. Okay, so you can also minus 705 in the next line. So of course, I will see when we are marking your script, we'll see the first line is correct, second line is not correct. Okay, we will ignore that automatically. But we'll give you 1 mark for the correct one. Okay, so make sure that it includes all the figures in. Even though you will present a different answer, okay, at the end of the NOPAT calculation, net operating profit after tax, and then when you insert this back to the EVA calculation, you will still get the full 1 mark if you are showing the right approach. Okay, because again, we'll put the stamp of own figure rule next to that. Okay, when you are inserting the figures in, it will be absolutely fine there. So make sure, be confident and to slot the figures in, and you will get very reasonable marks in the exam there, even though you are slotting the wrong figures. Make sure that the approach is correct there. Now, in terms of the capital employed, we are told about the opening balance of 19,404. Okay, so we include that in 19,404, and we adjust for all of these. Okay, so the adjusted capital employed, the sum of the above, that would be 23,732. Because changes in the period, we need to really adjust for that, okay, in our calculations, such as what I've done for you. A closing balance, we ignore that completely. And also we are told about the cost of capital, okay, we need to compute that as well. The equity and the debt is pre-tax, so what we need to do then is that we need to slot that in. And the debt over debt plus equity, okay, which would be 45% there. So which means that to account for the total amount of capital, the equity account for 55%, because total 45 and 55%, that would be 100 there. So in terms of the WACC calculation, okay, that we are showing to the examining team that we've got the ratios in terms of debt and equity. This is the sources of finance. in terms of debt and equity. Debt accounts for 45%, 55% accounting for equity. The cost of each of those, we're told about the cost of debt, 3.8%, based before tax, and times by 1 minus the tax rate. The tax rate is 25% now. And the equity, we're told automatically 12% now. So we use this one times by this one equals to this one times by this one. And then we sum all of these all together, and approximately will give me 0.0788, okay, for the WACC calculation there. You can tell the examiner about that. That's the WACC equals to this amount. And finally, how about NOPAT? Okay, we've adjusted everything. So we goes to summing all of these from start to end. So the NOPAT is approximately 3190. Okay, now finally to calculate the EVA, we use this figure, and then to minus capital employed adjusted times by the weighted average cost of capital and press enter. So the figure is positive. Okay, so it means that the business is doing great and bringing extra value and positive value to the shareholders. So you can see them, okay, see the calculations and to compare with the ROCE. That yes, firstly, it's positive, so this means that extra shareholders' wealth to shareholders, and also it's forward-looking, okay, calculation because it will capitalize the marketing expenditure as well as the R&D in. It's very consistent with the NPV calculation because it's all about the cash flows calculation there. However, it's quite complicated and also linked to shareholders' wealth. However, in terms of the ROCE, the return on capital employed, for example, as I said in previous recordings, that Warren Buffett is a famous investor in the US, would prefer companies with the ROE, return on equity, of more than 20% now. And very similar to ROCE there, so it can be comparable across different companies as a benchmark. Now, that's the idea behind it. Moving on to the value chain, so we're told about the inbound logistics, like the old information system, operations, that a consultant says is not a critical area, so you can buy this idea, absolutely fine now. The outbound logistics, yeah, old information system, marketing and sales, not a critical area, so perhaps you've got very stable customers already. After sales service, this is an important area of the revenue generation. However, they worry about over-focusing on this activity. In terms of the secondary activity, buying things, the IT, human and firm infrastructures, and as you can see, the only focus will be the HR, okay, in our business. So we need to comment on the value chain analysis by the consultant in the final requirement there. Of course, interestingly, that this question really gives you a few basic marks when you state the theory. Okay, so for example, related to 3 marks regarding what is the value chain, so it's split into primary, secondary, and shows how value is created and links with the company's objective there. And what you can do there is that you can talk about the focus on the external suppliers information, and the system is outdated and causing inefficiencies and so on and so forth. You can simply talk about the implications of each of the activity in turn, linking back to this company, and this is fine there. Now, final part would be to give examples regarding a strategic, tactical, and operational level. So strategic, 5 to 10 years or 3 to 10 years in the future, and really they are looking at the external data and forward-looking data rather than the internal ones, and so you can give examples on that. Okay, so simply be activities forecasting into the future and benchmarking against competitors, so you can talk about the strategic level. Tactical level is all about the midterm, okay, so related to the internal operations, how to compete with our competitors, and also to look at how each department really performs quite well, for example, on a monthly basis and so on. Operational level, on the other hand, is like, so we need to handle each and everyday task. So, for example, if you're dealing with your customer service, of course, what you need to do in the customer service department, you will need to deal with your customer on a daily basis. Okay, a customer may complain in a particular day, and how you're going to be responding to that. It's like the departmental focus, which means the operational level. So make sure that, yes, you can refer to my answers here, and that's how you approach this question. Very good question indeed, and best of luck then, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.
APC, accounting for your future.